I've only been shot at with rubber bullets once or twice. I've experienced LRADs, I've experienced pepper spray at close range, I've experienced tear gas, drones, helicopters, being shoved down by cops.
At officers who have backed off a bit, I've got to say. And as the night has worn on, the number of protesters certainly has dwindled, but they are the ones left are the real anarchists, the ones who are intent on causing the most damage, the most mayhem. Donald Trump, as we know, has ordered in...
I've wanted to make this video because I've been seeing the news out of LA over the last few days, the massive ICE raids that have been happening, the thousands and thousands of protesters that have been showing up there and in different parts of the country, the horrific social media images of people injured by police weaponry, chemical weapons, rubber bullets, people being hospitalized, arrested, children crying while they're sitting outside of workplaces where their parents are being detained by ICE inside. All of these are images that remind us of all of the worst parts of history where they say, like, the war is happening outside, or they came for their neighbors, and they came for your other neighbors, and then they came for you. This has always been the fucking history of the US. And I think it's important to take stock, to sit down, to even spend a little bit of time every day doing the research that you can to know what is happening, because yes, it's important to take breaks. Yes, it's important to look after your mental health. But when I tapped back into explicitly looking at the news over the weekend, I ended up sobbing before a pregame in my apartment. As I've said in videos before, I have had family members be detained by ICE. I had a stepfather who was detained and incarcerated by ICE for 4 years and then another 2 years. I know what it's like to be a child, to be at home, and you suddenly find out that your parent isn't coming back. The many different ways that our state is doing this, showing up to businesses during primetime work hours, showing up to elementary school graduations, coming back day after day in force, tricking people, covering up their faces, wearing gaiters. If you're so proud of your fucking job as an agent of the state, why do you need to cover your face up? And here's what I'll say is another reason I'm making this video. I've found lately when something makes me really fucking emotional in the news, it's important to either have a space to process it with your friends, with your community, with people you care about, or some kind of way to process it through art, through media, through writing, through community organizing. So this video is going to be for anyone that wants an update and an understanding of what has been happening in Los Angeles lately and wants to understand this from an organizer's perspective, from a child of immigrants' perspective, and from the perspective of someone who's done a lot of street action, demos, blockades, frontline shit, black bloc, etc., whatever you want to call it. We're going to talk about these things. So first, in just 3 days, from June 6th to June 8th, Los Angeles erupted in protests. ICE raids across South LA, the Fashion District, and Paramount led to more than 100 detentions. Communities responded with spontaneous roadblocks, street demonstrations, and freeway occupations. Lawless by whom? Federalized troops, 300 National Guard under Trump's executive power, with up to 2,000 on the way, swept in, deploying tear gas, rubber bullets, and flashbangs. California's governor called it a purposely inflammatory overreach. LA's mayor said it's terror. I think I saw a headline from in early June, I think it was like June 6th. ICE has done the most detentions in one day compared to whatever span of time in recent history. Over 2,200 detentions in a singular day. Those are women, children, parents, cousins, teenagers. There's even that news story of ICE wanting to look for someone's dad and they end up arresting the kid. On June 6th, ICE raids struck several locations across LA, notably the Fashion District, a Home Depot, and a clothing wholesaler, leading to over 100 detentions, including 44 administrative arrests. Protests ignited near the Westlake Home Depot. Activists threw cement concrete chunks at agents clad in riot gear. LAPD responded with tear gas, pepper spray, flashbang grenades, declared an unlawful assembly around 7:51 p.m. at Alameda and Temple, and authorized use of less lethal munitions. And it should be noted, this first day, ICE showed up at a really well-known warehouse during the day, during a work shift, and because of the size and scale of the warehouse, people inside were able to reach out to family members and to let community members know that this was happening, and this is why people gathered in such large numbers. communication and quick communication was a clear way for community to learn that this was happening. And I think that's so important to remember. J2, June 7th, protests expanded to Paramount. Demonstrators erected barricades with shopping carts and recycling bins, resulting in clashes with federal agents who used flashbangs and pepper balls, injuring at least 2 protesters. Around 2:30 p.m. on June 7th, LAPD and LA County sheriffs issued dispersal orders via loudspeaker, deploying tear gas. President Trump announced that he would deploy 2,000 National Guard troops, a move Governor Newsom called inflammatory and potentially violating federal state protocols. In downtown LA on Saturday night, a second wave of protests saw chants of ICE out of LA. And then, as of yesterday, June 8th, troops backed by federal order under Title X began arriving at key sites, including the Metropolitan Detention Center. It's also said that a lot of where National Guard is trying to protect or being deployed is trying to protect city infrastructure and buildings. The downtown march from City Hall to Federal Detention Center escalated around 3 p.m. Police declared most of downtown an unlawful assembly using tear gas, rubber bullets, flash grenades. Hundreds blocked the 101 freeway, prompting California Highway Patrol to clear the roadway using flashbangs and tactical formations. Protesters set a fire to at least 6 Waymo driverless taxis and spray-painted F ICE. National Guard troops supported the LAPD and DHS surrounded the detention center, deploying tear gas and pepper spray. Clashes resulted in around 27 to 45 arrests. A British photojournalist covering the protest was hit in the thigh by a 40-millimeter sponge round fired by police. There's other parts of the country where protesters have been run over. I've seen videos out of LA where you see people and their eyes are like fucked up, and it's probably from the rubber bullets. And really, what I want to bring us to here is like you're hearing all of these descriptions of what is happening, and all you're hearing a lot in terms of the state response, in terms of the state's physical response, is flashbangs, pepper spray balls, barricades, riot gear. The classic rule of any protest mobilization is that when the police or the state shows up with more equipment, more militarized gear, more weaponry, and they show up in force, that is a sign of what their intent is in that space.
Please let all of the insane and atrocious footage coming out of Los Angeles of federal agents with masks shooting into crowds of people bring back into the fore, into the mainstream, the demand to wholesale abolish ICE. I and likely many of the people that are watching this video are older than ICE is as an agency. That agency was created in March of 2003. The Department of Homeland Security, November of 2002. Let's not get it twisted. This is an agency whose primary purpose is to sow discord and rip communities and families apart in the way that we are seeing unfold in mass here in Los Angeles. And they're using billions and billions of our hard-earned tax dollars to be able to pull off terrorizing and ripping apart all of our communities. And that pool of like multiple $billion that is currently ICE's budget has just continued to balloon year after year after year, no matter who is in office, no matter who is in charge of the Congress. Like, we cannot let politicians continue getting away with the whole, like, immigrants are welcome here, heart facade that they use to win elections, while they continue to arm up the organizations that terrorize our communities. And some, like the Gavin Newsoms of the world, swear 10 toes down that they're not collaborating with ICE in any way, shape, or form. They're just doing what they need to keep the peace in our communities. Tell me what is so peaceful about mobilizing like state forces against constituents engaging in direct action against federal agents that are declaring war on their own citizenry. Like I need someone to explain this to me quickly. In summation, abolish ICE is the bare minimum. ACAB really goes in the same bucket. And direct action is one of the few things that are keeping our communities afloat at the moment, because no police force has the capabilities to keep us safe the way that we keep us safe.
It's a visual escalation, and it's a visual escalation meant to let the crowd know if you stay here longer, things are about to get ugly. You're about to get fucked up. And I think that psychological element of protesting and people showing up spontaneously and then being exposed to all these different forms of street violence, it in some ways is a harkening to 2020, like people showing up earnestly and then having their first experiences being flashbanged or arrested or detained or kettled. And so I really want us to understand that this show of police and militarized force is a signifier of where our government is, where it has been, and where it's going to continue to go. So much of what the Trump administration is trying to do is trying to scrub money away from certain things with Doge, despite all of the Trump and Elon disaster, romance drama. And they're trying to funnel more money into immigration and ICE. If we look at the proposed big, beautiful spending bill, which hasn't, I believe, crossed the Senate yet, but our government is really trying to invest way more in militarization. I mean, why is Trump trying to build the Golden Dome like Israel, which is that anti-missile system, which would put the U.S. way forward in the arms race? And in the big, beautiful bill, there's a sweeping budget proposal including $27 billion upfront for ICE operations and personnel, and then $45 billion through 2029 to expand detention capacity. This is where we are all headed. This is where we are already at. And I think we need to, one, see LA and the recent cropping up of protests as a signifier of what can happen in different cities all around the country. We need to be prepared for how we might show up for similar styles of ICE raids in our own cities, especially if you live somewhere near a university, if you live in any city or area where there's high immigrant populations, anywhere where there's a lot of people working in service industries who are undocumented, any major Midwestern or Rust Belt city, any major city. It's just like this is gonna happen. And I think people need to be prepared to both witness state violence and be at the end of state violence in defense of themselves and their communities and those around them. This is why it's so important to really hone in on the fact that we need to know our community, know what's happening in our neighborhoods, because if there's a network of group chats where people are sharing information about ICE raids, are you in community with people enough to have connection to those networks to be able to spread the word accordingly when the right information is shared out about when or how ICE raids are happening? What ICE is doing is literally should just be called kidnapping. Calling it kidnapping matters because on a legal and just state level, like a state that has due process is good, blah, blah, blah. Civil detention must follow due process. Civil detention must follow due process. There needs to be evidence. There needs to be the right to a lawyer, the right to remain silent, the right to proper legal counsel, the right to translators. The fact that ICE and DHS is trying to scrub back all of these forms of due process, detaining people that have a legal right to be here, falsely accusing people of being criminals, detaining people for indefinite periods of time, trying to build more facilities to detain more people for indefinite periods of time, shipping people away despite the fact that judges say it's not legal for you to ship this person out of the country. When we do not have due process, free speech doesn't exist anymore. And we can be detained at any point and anything can be done to us. And labeling these ICE operations kidnappings highlights how ICE routinely bypasses legal protections, how they abduct people without proper warrants or protocol. Why is ICE covering their faces? Why are they showing up to public spaces where they aren't allowed to target people in the same way if it's not a targeted operation, and still trying to use a similar protocol, still trying to intimidate and coerce people? On a political and moral level, kidnapping shows the reality of what this feels like. You don't speak a language, you can't advocate for yourself, you're being forced to sign papers you don't understand, and you're being shipped away without any due process, without any legal protection, without anyone being able to look out for you. I mean, look at the videos of people being arrested in front of their children, and ICE is just taking the parent away while the child is just there. Kidnapping. The state are violence workers. They're violence workers. They use pain compliance. It's just wild to me, because if the public is telling the state what you're doing is immoral, what you're doing is violent, what you're doing is wrong, we do not stand for this. Does the state have the ultimate authority to tell citizens, shut the fuck up, or we're going to beat you up or kill you or detain you? What does that sound like? It's literally what we're experiencing. It's what we're experiencing. And the last thing I'll say on the kidnapping note is that it situates ICE within a broader history of state coercion. From forced removals to the Zoot Suit era harassment that LA obviously has faced, to modern ICE collaborations, there's a system of abduction. Abduction in a way where the due process is scrubbed away, and whoever is considered the other has already been erased. They don't need to be here. I mean, this is how police operate. They beat you up, they arrest you, they get you on trumped up charges, you have to take a plea deal, or whatever it is. They expose you to so much terror and brutality and violence. Easier solution is to succumb to that violence and to figure out what you can do to survive. We need to show the world that we're capable of in terms of communities surrounding undocumented folks and immigrant folks and people that are racialized and otherized by this country, is to show that we pull up, that we resist, that we fight back, that there isn't a reality where we won't not do something. And I think it's really important to ask the question is, how is the mainstream media and state officials being complicit in constructing a narrative that frames militarized crackdowns as order restoring rather than exposing them as acts of state terrorism?
Now, those protests continued all night. In fact, reporter Rob Scott got a first-hand look at some of those dangerous fireworks that you just heard the chief mention. Take a look at this.
Well, the chaos here in downtown Los Angeles continues tonight. I got to say, it doesn't feel like the LA we all know and are familiar with. This feels like some sort of third world conflict zone. I mean, we have fires burning in the middle of intersections. We have police and law enforcement agencies under constant attack by these protesters. They have had rocks hurled through the windscreen. And now they are firing fireworks directly at officers who have backed off a bit, I've got to say. And as the night has worn on, the number of protesters certainly has dwindled, but they are the ones left are the real anarchists, the ones who are intent on causing the most damage.
The state will always describe dissent as escalation. They will always describe dissent as escalation. I mean, unless like state officials are in the crowd and they're marching too, but even then it's like there's mayors and shit that right now we might even need to change our language. It's not state officials, it's executive officials. And then next, I want to talk about the tactics that the police and the counter protesters have used, but I'm going to talk about this from an educational standpoint. So let's start there.
It was bad. What we've seen subsequent to that is getting increasingly worse and more violent. Tonight we had individuals out there shooting commercial-grade fireworks at our officers. That can kill you. And we have adapted our tactics to be able to have a chance to be able to take these people into custody and to be able to hold them accountable. We are overwhelmed as far as the number of people out there engaged in this type of activity.
It is interesting because we do see a series of tactics or motives or themes kind of rising to the surface. I mean, I think the first thing I'll say in terms of ICE and how they're entering these situations and choosing to do their detentions and raids, it's very shameless. It's very shameless. It's going into populated areas, using lots of show of force, refusing to identify yourself, lying about why you're there, saying it's part of an active criminal investigation, using false information. ICE has already been an agency of terror. I think the illusion that the American public has fallen into, which is like, oh, like we have sanctuary spaces, like there are spaces that ICE can't go to. Even with that reality, ICE has been fucked up in the past. They have been manipulative and coercive. They serve warrants that aren't actually signed by judges. They coerce people into signing papers who don't understand the language of what they're doing. Now it's just more explicit. And so I think we really need to understand that these tactics that ICE is using, it's not that these tactics are wrong in the state's eyes. It's the fact that they're using them more, and we're able to see the patterns of immorality and coercion at play. ICE showing up to elementary school graduations, ICE showing up to schools during school drop-off time, ICE showing up to grocery stores, to workplaces, places where people who have families go to either work or get the basics of life. Showing up to those spaces and harassing people. Stopping people in the street, taking advantage of the fact that people might not be able to speak English in a way that allows them to advocate for themselves. All of these things are tactics that ICE has been using in the past and is continuing to increase now. And in response to these most recent protests, as I mentioned before, police have been using tear gas, pepper spray, flashbang grenades, stun grenades, rubber bullets, sponge rounds. It should be understood that these are weapons of war, weapons of terror. Tear gas. These are chemical inflammants that inflame the eyes, throat, lungs, causing coughing, vomiting, intense pain, can worsen asthma, heart conditions, respiratory failure. The fact that when police use this weaponry and they say, oh, we use it with just the right amount of force, and if someone has medical complications because of the uses of this weaponry, it's not the weaponry that killed them, it's the medical complication. This happened here in my city that I live in 2020 when someone went to one of the protests here. Her name was Sarah Grossman. She was, I believe, pepper sprayed or tear gassed. And due to complications that happen because of that chemical inflammant, there are lethal misapplications to all of these weapons as well. When canisters hit bodies directly, you can have blunt force trauma.
You just shut the fuck up. You okay?
You can have hemorrhaging or even deaths occur. And it's used indiscriminately, often in confined spaces or protests. Tear gas becomes chemical warfare against civilians. Flashbangs. These create auditory and physical trauma. These are devices that cause massive disorientation, loud noises, blind flashing. This can cause panic, hearing loss, psychological stress, injuries. These are also used in densely crowded areas, and they can crack skulls and break bones. And they transform crowd control into violent quelling. Flash grenades are scary. Flash grenades, you really have to learn, like, in these mass protest situations, I'll say this. When you're in a crowd and you have an idea, you always need to have an idea of where the police are. Where's the main oppositional line? Where are they on the flanking streets? And then with that, it always is like, if they're using flash grenades or stun grenades or all that shit, run if it's land super close to you. If it's kind of further away, don't just immediately run and panic, because that also adds a lot to the chaos of the situation. And it also depends on how much weaponry they're using. Like, if you're really in a crowd where they're really pelting it down, it's fucking terrifying. Rubber bullets and sponge rounds, often inaccurately deployed. These kinetic projectiles can blind, maim, fracture bones, and cause death, especially when fired at close range or aimed at bodies. This has already been happening. I mean, there's a British journalist who was hit with a 40-millimeter round. It's a false equivocation that the protests are the escalation, when actually the police are. And I was listening to a podcast earlier that was talking about how the LA mayor is like, this is fucking wild that the Trump wants to deploy National Guard. Interesting that the media is kind of pushing and pulling between these protests are mostly peaceful and there's only some instances of violence. It's interesting how fascism is forcing different state entities to describe the violence that is happening differently. The mayor of LA is saying, this ain't that bad. Trump is saying, oh, hell no, hell no, hell no, hell no. On Truth Social, Trump said demonstrators, violent insurrectionist mobs, and demanded arrests. Quote, arrest the people in face masks. Who's the people in face masks? Is it the state officials that are trying to hide their identity? Or is it protesters that don't want people and their neighbors to be kidnapped? When I think democracy, I think a system that can hold itself accountable, that can seek forms of justice, that can lock up corrupt officials. Has that ever been the history of capitalism or colonization or white supremacy? Has that ever really been the history? The state is infighting in such a public manner and not trying to give this illusion of democracy. I think it means that where the state is deriving its power is changing. Where the U.S. is deriving its power is changing.
I just have to say that all of you were there Friday. Everybody knows what happened Friday. A workplace, several workplaces were targeted and raids took place. Now, in the beginning, the administration said they were just looking for dangerous felons, violent people. It's hard to say that that's what they found at a workplace or in a Home Depot parking lot. When this happens, it terrifies people. It sends a sense of fear and chaos in our city. And you well remember a few years ago in the last administration that kids were afraid to go to school. Parents were afraid to go to work. This impacts all of our city. You can't terrify the workforce, and then expect for people to get the jobs done.
The U.S. is trying to be an ethno-state, a militaristic power, both domestically and internationally, and it's trying to call the shots. And I think what the state is seeing is that people are like, no, this is fucking crazy. You're not going to do this. You're not going to come into my neighborhood and kidnap people off the streets. It's not going to happen. In what ways does lethal weapons like rubber bullets and tear gas serve not just as crowd control, but as psychological warfare, intended to traumatize and deter future organizing? I've only been shot at with rubber bullets once or twice. I've experienced LRADs. I've experienced pepper spray at close range. I've experienced tear gas, drones, helicopters, being shoved down by cops. All of these things live in the body. Now let's move on to talking about the tactics that the protesters have used.
And the type of things that they're doing, they'll they'll take backpacks, and the backpack will have a cinder block in it. They have a hammer, and they'll break up the cinder block and use that, pass it around to throw at officers, to throw at cars, and throw at other people. We've seen people with hammers, and you've broadcasted, breaking the bollards behind the federal building and taking the rocks, if you will, or pieces of concrete, and throwing them at officers. We've had liquid of who knows what description thrown at officers. There's no limit to what they're doing to our officers.
There are enough forms of communication for large numbers of people to come out to oppose these ICE raids, to show up within a timely manner. I saw one particular social media post where someone asked someone randomly at a protest like how they found out about what ICE was doing, and they found out through Reddit. Are these modes of communication, whether it be group chats or networks of communication where people can be alerted like ICE is going to be in this area of the community, we've have this information confirmed, and it allows people to show up and act accordingly. Some of the other innovations I've seen are people gathering outside of, or not innovations, but tactics, people gathering outside of ICE facilities and protesting outside of those and trying to block vehicles and people that are being detained from being able to enter. I've been seeing people try to stop the ICE vehicles from being able to take people away, forming human chains and blockades around vehicles, blocking the entrances or exits of a particular building. I saw a really cool video where, in dealing with the tear gas, there's also been a lot of tips online. I've been sharing a lot of advice about tear gas and pepper spray online. I've also seen a lot of people talking about how to get tear gas away from the crowds. I saw this really cool video of someone who brought a leaf blower to the protest and went straight up to the front line. Also, a lot of tactics later at night with people literally facing off against cops, throwing things at vehicles, throwing certain kind of chemicals or agents back at the police and at ICE agents. I saw someone online talking about the different ways that you can stop a vehicle from being able to leave a certain kind of location. Because of the immorality of the state and because of the public spectacle of how these raids are happening, it's requiring that people have a tactical understanding of what it means to hold space, to stop the state from being able to enter that space, or to stop the state from being able to leave with the intended people that they plan to. And that looks like large numbers arriving. That looks like people chanting and creating some kind of confusion. That looks like road blockages. That looks like getting the weapons that the police shoot at the crowds to go back towards the police, de-arresting people. I think it looks like so many things. When groups of people gain a tactical cohesion and are able to oppose the state, that is when the conditions and the playing field really begins to change. And I think now is a moment where a lot of people can continue to learn from the movements that are happening around the country, the reactions to ICE, the reactions to police, and begin to study, understand, or just think of what tools you'd need in your city or location to effectively oppose an ICE raid if that were to be necessary. What kind of tools would you need? Something to think about, something to think about. Let's not forget they're using fireworks too. Like the use of fireworks to hold off police, to distance them from a crowd, to distract them while they're trying to beat someone up. And to end this video, I want to raise a series of questions for you or I to think about. First question is, when officials frame resistance as violence and military crackdowns as restoring order, what story are they really telling us about who deserves freedom and who deserves fear? If ICE rolled into your neighborhood tomorrow, would you and your people be ready? What kind of tools would you need? What kind of community connections would you need? And what does it mean to say that the state is the real terrorist when it's deploying chemical weapons, when it's bringing in troops into our cities, when it's using pepper spray and rubber bullets at close range, when it's detaining people, arresting them indefinitely? Honor your rage, to honor your despair. A big part of what the state is trying to do is beat us into submission, beat us into a presumed state of normalcy around what is happening, and to surround us with so much of its terror that the terror becomes normal. It becomes the peace and the law and order upon which we live upon, which is literally already the case. But with the state's conditions and rationales and weaponry and resources changing, with the Trump administration trying to funnel, I mean, what is it, over $100 billion into the fucking military and ICE? We're seeing the equation change. And if the state is changing their part of the equation, we as lovers of freedom have to change our part of the equation too. Thank you for watching another video on my channel. If you want to support this channel, like this video, comment with something you've learned or something that you've been processing over the recent week or days. What lessons have you taken away from these protests from afar or close up? Consider becoming a channel member, which means you get early access to videos. And if you really want to support, head on over to Patreon, where whenever I post like these more topical videos, I always put out like low-key Patreon newsletters where it has a bunch of resources, things that go even beyond things that I put in the description here. So if you want a resource that you can tap into and dig into and learn more things and read more articles, definitely head to my Patreon. Paid members get early access and some exclusive content. And then there's also those free newsletters that go out as well. And I really just want to remind people, stay angry, because we deserve to be fucking angry.